Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hey, what's going on?
Hi, everybody. I see some people chiming in the chat already. I am Lexi Grant. I run They Got Acquired, and I'm joined here by Dave Sinkinson, who's going to tell us about selling his business. So we are both excited to see you all.
Pumped to be here. It's going to be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. No, thank you for taking the time. I know you share so generously on LinkedIn and your newsletter, and we really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, so let's say hello to people in the chat. If you guys can say hi, tell us where you're calling from. It's only 1 minute after the hour, so I can still see people kind of coming into the room now. But say hello, let us know where you're calling from or where you're joining us from. And if you want to tell us what kind of business you run too, we're always open to seeing some of that. Awesome.
Nice.
We should have
SaaS,
a variety
all right.
here. Yes.
You'll relate to a lot of what I'm talking about today. SaaS homies in the house.
That's the group here.
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit of housekeeping quickly. Hi, Karina.
Jason,
Awesome. Hi,
you're on a
Jason.
beach? Good for you. Wow. I never thought I'd distract somebody from a vacation, but that's pretty cool.
Come hang out with us. All right.
Yeah.
There's a couple of tabs on the right side. So if you haven't been to this platform before, it's great. I mean, first of all, please use the chat liberally. I love seeing just ideas that pop up when we're talking, and anything you want to share that resonates with you, please pop it into the chat. We love that. To the right of that, you'll see a little question box, and that's a place where you can leave questions. Feel free to ask them throughout this talk. And if there are a lot that come in, I will leave extra time to answer all of your Q&As at the end. And then there's also a poll area to the right where I want to push some polls live right now. There's two. One asks what kind of business you run. And the second one is asking about your company size. And that just gives us a sense of who's here. And Dave will be able to see those as well. So if you want to take a minute to answer those polls.
Nice. We got a lot of people in the 5 to 20 million range. Thanks for joining us today. That's cool.
Awesome.
Interesting because you could be 6 million or 19.
Mm-hmm. That's a big range. They only give you five choices, so
that's okay. I'm not judging. I'm just commenting.
No, it's good.
That's
great. Okay, cool.
Wow, got a really good split there. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's always cool to see kind of like who shows up too when we've got a US SaaS founder. But really, I think the lessons that you're going to talk about today can be applicable to any kind of business. But hopefully, I figured we'd see a lot of SaaS folks today. All right. So, Dave, I would love to hear a little bit about your background, and maybe you can tell us about just like an overview about the SaaS business that you sold.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, just thanks everybody for being here today. And obviously, Lexi, thanks for hosting. It's awesome. So basically I started a software company with my brother. So that's the first kind of like interesting thing. 10 years between us. It's my older brother, Chris. And we basically started a company in public safety. It's kind of a weird market, but and it was obviously a software product, but the origin is effectively I was working at a major post-secondary institution, and while I was in that role, I was on a committee called the Campus Safety Working Group, and we did an audit of the blue light emergency poles on campus as part of that committee. So if you're not familiar with what that is, on almost every single university and college campus in North America, there are these big blue poles that when you press them, it contacts campus police or security, and they know which pole was triggered. So naturally, they're able to come and assist you. So we did an audit of those poles and found that about 30% of those poles were broken. And so sort of being in the right place at the right time, I said, well, what if you had a mobile app where you could press a button and it would call campus police? And this was obviously a very simple concept. I had an ace up my sleeve, which was my brother, who had been working a lot in mobile development, was a solo entrepreneur with like a couple of different ventures. I had a few other side hustles going on for the record as well. So basically, we were just like very entrepreneurial minded. And anyway, so this is also for context back in 2011. So the App Store wasn't very old yet. So doing anything with a mobile app was like pretty out there. I guess for broader context there too, like the app worked on BlackBerry. So like really, that really sets up like how long ago we're talking about. So we ended up working really closely with that first customer, that first higher education institution. We did a really good job. They referred us to other institutions in the area. So I'm Canadian. If you haven't heard my accent yet, it's going to come up with like roof and about and a. But anyway, so this is a Canadian institution, and so they referred us to other Canadian ones. We also got an opportunity at the University of Melbourne in Australia, and this is our first like couple of institutions. And so the app wasn't, the company was called App Armor, but the app was branded to every institution we work with. So just jumping ahead a bit, at NYU it was called Safe NYU, at UCLA it was called Bruin Safe, at Vanderbilt it was called Vandy Safe, so on and so forth. We did this for lots of important reasons. But long story short is it was very successful going to market that way. And then over time we expanded. We started to do more. We had the app, but the apps, but we also did emergency notifications, which most people are familiar with, but like emergency text messages, emails, voice calls, so on and so forth. I can go into that later. We proliferated our product, moved up market, and sort of stepped on our competitors' toes. And I don't know, Lexi, if you want me to give like the ending of this as well too.
Yeah, that would be great actually, because I think
Sure.
that we can kind of go into a little bit about how you built the business, but of course,
Yeah.
most people want to hear about how you sold it. Yeah.
So then we got a lot of traction. We were stepping on the toes of our competitors. One of them out of Boston was called Rave Mobile Safety. And I think, so during the pandemic, a lot of things changed, and we had a big pivot during the pandemic, which I'm happy to talk about as well, but that was a really important moment for our company. And basically, obviously we were in physical safety. So it was like a real challenge to be like, okay, people can't physically be together anymore. So how do we stay relevant? And I'm happy to talk about that if we want to talk about it later. But anyway, we did really well during this like sort of pivot we did, and we ended up getting acquired by that American competitor out of Boston, again called Rave, and they ended up buying us for about $40 million. What was interesting is we went through a bit of a different process there. Most of the time when you sell a business, you go through with bankers, and they kind of like auction you, and they find different bidders, and you go from there. We didn't do any of that. I actually had established relationships with other strategic competitors, sort of in like not like a weird sort of way, but in a back channel kind of way. Like I sort of knew them, they sort of knew us, they knew we could trust each other. And I can explain how I sort of built that relationship as well. And we had a couple of offers. We ended up going with Rave though. And what was really interesting about that is about 10 months after we were acquired by Rave Mobile Safety itself was acquired by Motorola Solutions into Chicago for $560 million. So we went in a 14-month period, we went from 20-person company to 250 to 20,000. So my staff were like pretty rocked by that. But it was a really interesting journey, and it was pretty crazy. And the last thing I mentioned here, I didn't specifically mention, is that we also bootstrapped the company. So there was no venture capital behind it. I can offer a lot of opinions on the complexities of venture capital and why it might not be great early, but has uses later on in the life of your company.
That was a great overview and might help us like skip more quickly to how you sold the business. Cool. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things that I think are really good to call out. First of all, that you said you're bootstrapped, and a $40 million sale for a bootstrap company is fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think we forget that, like, you see that headline all the time, like company sold for hundreds of millions or whatever. And often they have, an infusion of investments. And so it looks very different, right? And so to sell for that amount when you're bootstrapped, I think is amazing. So yeah, that's awesome.
It was a hilariously simple cap table. It was me and my brother. That's it. There are no other debts. There's nothing else happening. So you can do the math pretty darn quick here. And I think that when you see those really big acquisitions, at least for some founders, they're pretty diluted by the time they get down that road. So like I made 20 million obviously off of the acquisition. If you're a founder and you have 10% of a $200 million company, assuming you don't get charged taxes for some reason, you'd be making the same amount. But to build a $200 million company is really, really difficult. And so it was definitely an interesting path, and I'm very fortunate.
Did you do that intentionally? Like, were there points along the way where you could have taken investment?
Yeah, actually there were. And particularly as we started to so we were profitable pretty quickly. So we achieved profitability in probably year two, maybe like optimistic or conservatively year two. We made our first million after, I think, about year four. after that happened, we started to get, the phone starts to ring. People are kind of interested. They're hearing about you from people in the market, or we were in like the Toronto sort of a little bit anyway in the Toronto startup ecosystem. But because we were bootstrapped again, we weren't like that obvious. But people thought, hey, maybe there's an opportunity, and we had angel investors reach out. I mean, ultimately, what happened was we were just like, this is a lot of work. Like, I think I'm just going to go out and get more sales. I think I'm just going to train more salespeople. I think I'm going to focus on driving top line revenue rather than taking on another partner and like losing equity and losing some control, and all the other kind of like complications that can come with early raises. So we had opportunities, but I think Chris and I really didn't want to do it if we didn't have to.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And it sounds like along the way, you started getting calls from, you mentioned investors, but I'm assuming acquirers as well. And that happens, once you hit a certain size. Can you talk us through like how you approached that when they started coming inbound? What did you do?
So the first thing is, when you cross the $5 million threshold of like top line revenue, I don't know if you're like added to some list or something, but you are going to get a hit up. And we had, I should point out too, context is important. I like history. I'm a history guy, whatever. But the context is king here. And the thing that's important about it is back in 2020, 2021, cash was really cheap. There was a lot of money. So their interest rates were crazy low. COVID really changed stuff. And so there was just a lot of people interested in putting their money behind something. And if they saw that a business was out there, in a SaaS business in particular, that was already profitable, like to them, that was like easy peasy. So we were, I would say probably on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, we were hit up by somebody, and that would be like a cold email or a cold call from some organization, private equity, or looking to buy all or buy a significant percentage of the business. You also see like software conglomerates, like Constellation Software, like those kind of like those big ones that just buy a lot of different pieces of software and kind of sit on top. And to be honest, for a long time, and perhaps this speaks to sort of like your founder paranoia, I very much thought that this was some sort of, maybe didn't want to believe it, but it was like some sort of angle that our competitors were playing to try to get me off my game, to like get me. No, isn't that crazy? I was like very much like, this is, somebody's up to something. Somebody's trying to throw me off. And the only reason why I like started engaging with some of the emails is I really recognized the companies, and there were two strategics that we got pretty serious with, and I just knew who they were, and I knew how we would fit into their business model. And I think as we started to think more seriously about being acquired, I remember my brother and I were sitting on Lake Ontario, looking out over the lake, and he just sort of said to me, like, yeah, I could sell. And I was just like flabbergasted, because like he had been like Mr. No Sell for a long time. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was basically looking for some kind of credibility that they would also treat our people well, respect our technology. And so that would imply, fitting into their ecosystem somehow, and treat their customers well. And to me, that always felt like a strategic acquisition would make most sense. Some people, I'll just get to this as well, and you can go deeper if you want, but some people sometimes ask me, like, did you consider funding at this point, later on in the game, right? Because we had a lot of things going. And the answer is sort of, like, we didn't take any steps on it, but we thought about it. And I think we decided that we were really exhausted. And I think if you look at a lot of founders, usually around that 8 to 10 year zone, they're looking for a way to lock in a win, to really capitalize on what they've built. And they also tend to be pretty darn tired. And COVID made it like absolutely crazy. And so, yeah, by that point we were like, do we want to go for funding, keep what we're doing, like steady as she goes, or sell? And we had a really good offer, so we sold. So
backing up, you also had an offer from the buyer that did eventually buy you. You had an offer from them like a year before, right? Can you talk about that?
I love this story. So this is the story that my brother blew it. I don't know if this is going to be like super public or what. It's fine. I've actually done this. Which podcast? What's the one that Sam Parr has? The other one, MoneyWise. On MoneyWise. And I sort of threw Chris under the bus, but anyway, it's fine. But basically, so what happened was, so again, I'm getting communications from these other companies, these strategics, and so I get one from TTV, which is the private equity group behind Rave Mobile Safety. And I knew that because I had done my research on our competitors and all that kind of stuff. And they said, hey, we want to talk. And so we got talking with them. We kind of do like a KG demo. We kind of go through this experience. And actually, even backing up for a second, even a little bit further, the reason why they knew us in the market and they felt confident enough to have this sort of dance with us was that years before, one of the other competitors in the market did this pretty fraudulent, like overtly fraudulent thing where they created a fake website with a fake company, and they were going through our sales process, and it was really fishy because they're going through it so fast. I was like, something's wrong here. Like, who are these people? And the only reason we found it was the competitor was that they somehow left their address on like the About Us page. It must have been like something like Wix or whatever, like automatically slapped onto the page. So anyway, so I told our, real moral dilemma here for a second. It's like, should I tell anybody about this? And I decided to tell our competitors to be like, hey, just so you know, these guys are being total a-holes right now. And that was actually my first interaction with Rave Mobile Safety, with their CEO. So years later, here we are. They knew they could trust us. They saw what we were doing in the market. They thought we were legit. So I had like somehow built rapport without really knowing them. Anyway, so then we go into this, we show them all this information. We show them, our software. We sign the LOI. Sorry, not the LOI, the non-disclosure. And they kind of said, okay, like, what would you be willing to sell the business for? And this is a classic sales maneuver. I mean, as a salesperson, I know this. And the answer is, what do you think it's worth? And so instead, my brother, without hesitation, just goes, $20 million. just like happen. And I was so mad. He wasn't in the same room at the time, but I would have kicked him pretty hard under a table if he was nearby.
I guess this is like the dynamics of working with your sibling.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? We trust each other, but it doesn't mean like I just know him, and he's so like 0 or 1, off or on. He's very binary. It's like this is what I'm looking for. He claims now, in retrospect, that he meant $20 million for each of us, which I think is a very convenient revisionist history. But anyway, so he says this, and naturally, about a week later, we got an LOI, that we could sign that has the number, and it's $20 million, and there's a lot of strings attached to it.
What do you mean by that? What kind of strings?
Yeah, I guess it's of interest on this particular program. Earnout period, it was pretty long. It wasn't all of the money up front. It was about, I think it was like 60% of the money, something like that. I'm going to get these numbers like loosely wrong, but you get the gist of it. So about 60% of the money up front, and then the remainder of the money tied to sales targets that I would have to hit. And when I was thinking, and there were also development targets that Chris had that were around like integrations and such. But the thing that I had a lot of trouble with was I don't know how potent my company is going to be after I'm acquired by our biggest competitor. Like we did really well against them, but I don't know necessarily what the market looks like. I also don't know their culture and their bureaucracy, and how that's going to play into my ability to sell and our team's ability to sell. And lastly, is I had a kid on the way. It was my first kid, was coming in hot. And I was like, I don't really want to commit to all this. Like I say in the book that basically sleep would have been off the table. So, so there was that. And that was the biggest piece, I think. I think what you probably talk about a lot is in what you do is kind of like you want to get as much of the money up front as possible with a few, obviously with a few strings attached. So I just didn't like that. I didn't think we got a good multiple because Chris kind of put his foot in his mouth. So we said no. We said no, which was kind of weird.
Yeah, how did that go over?
Like they weren't thrilled. So crisis management kind of thing. I call the private equity group. I call the CEO. We get on a call, say we're not going to do it. I think we can do better. We want to bet on ourselves. If you're still interested in a year's time, like give us a chance to boost these numbers, and we can go from there. And they weren't happy, but they also weren't like incredibly pissed off. And so I was like, okay. And you know what? I also had to just accept the fact that, hey, this could be gone forever. Like, that's okay. My BATNA, so my best alternative to a negotiated agreement here, it's an acronym, it was I could keep working and make a lot of money every year. Okay, I can do that. It might not be $40 million, but or $20 million in this context. But by that point, Chris and I were paying ourselves. we like to say like rookie NBA player salaries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like pretty, we weren't LeBron, but
Mm-hmm.
like pretty good. So we
Yeah.
were really happy with that.
That
Yeah.
just to pause on that for a second, because the last two interviews that we did like this live Q&As, both founders didn't pay themselves for years. I guess this by then you'd run the business for 10 years. Did you pay yourself in the early days?
Yeah. So ran the business, but by the time we sold, would have been about 8 years. And yeah, we like very modestly, I would say. The other thing is like, it kind of dovetails into how did we bootstrap this? And the way we bootstrapped it, as I alluded to earlier, Chris had a bunch of side hustles. I had a few side hustles. Those things were making some amount of money. So when we first started working together, we had a couple of things on the go. We were definitely not focused on anything. We didn't know what the winning horse was, but we were making a lot of bets. And, we had some things that were bringing in like 10 grand a year, like absolutely nothing. And then we had other things that were bringing in, like we had one of the last two horses was bringing in about 100, 150K, like a pretty meaningful, little business going there. And so I would pay myself out of sort of this pool of revenue, and it would not be a ton of money. Anything we could, we would reinvest back into what we were doing, whether that was more employees or building systems or going to trade shows and more sales efforts or marketing or whatever. Like it was going back into the business. So that was kind of how that sort of broke down.
Cool. So fast forward to a year later, and you got another offer from this firm. But I want to just go over kind of what some of the stats look like at this point. So tell me if this is right. It sounds like $7 million in annual revenue, Canadian.
Yep.
So that's about 5.6 million. Yep.
Yes.
US. And then, I'll say you ended up selling for a 6x revenue multiple.
Sure.
But tell us kind of what happened like a year later that they came back to you?
A couple of important things happened. So first off is we had our COVID pivot. So let me tell this story because it's really, really important. So I don't know if people remember this, but I mean, COVID sucks. I don't think we all just try to like forget that happened. But anyway, so during the pandemic, there was early on, there was a couple of different mobile app use cases. So the first thing for us was we were in physical safety and people were suddenly not on campus anymore. However, a lot of our contracts were structured around multi-year commitments with like a poison pill for these universities and colleges. So they were going to keep paying unless they wanted to buy us out, which was like, okay, we'd be fine with that, I suppose. But so we had almost no churn. Everybody stayed on. What happened is our top of funnel just evaporated, like just gone. There's no net new opportunity because like the product was not really needed. And so as the pandemic progressed, there were like conversations around, do you remember contact tracing apps? You get close enough to somebody else and like buzz, you're like, oh, that person had COVID, a few weeks ago. So I remember we were deciding, are we going to go into that? Are we going to go into the self-assessment? So if you wanted to go to a restaurant and it'd be, or in this case, a university, say, were you in contact with anybody else? Did you, were you sick? Those silly questionnaires you had to do. And going into that, and then later on, potentially into what we assumed would be some sort of vaccine verification tool for the institutions. And so we were kind of like fiddling with these ideas. We read the documentation, we looked at it. We didn't want to do contact tracing because Google and Apple explicitly said only one organization in the whole jurisdiction is going to have the authority to do this. So we were like, well, that's silly. Why would we even bother? Which I don't think some other people read the fine print because some of our competitors did that. And those apps went nowhere. Like there was no adoption for those tools. So we leaned in first on the self-assessment. That was a good way to get some relevancy back to the platform. So it was like, okay, all of our apps are prefix or suffix the name safe for the most part. There's a couple of them that are a little bit different, but the idea is like, so brew and safe, okay? So your brew and safe now has a health focus, and that health focus is on self-assessment. If you want to go to school, fill out this questionnaire, you send it, goes to the administration, they have that information. And at some institutions, that even like authorized or disabled their like fob, like to get in, like the key card to get into certain places. Like it was interesting pieces of technology there.
So were you checking if people were healthy, they're COVID free or?
Yeah, well, the first one was we weren't doing any of that in person. This was basically an honor-based questionnaire.
Yeah.
Fill it in, which is that's how it worked. Then later on, what we would do is at least in Canada here and in some U.S. jurisdictions, there was basically vaccine verification of some degree. And that is up here. We have universal healthcare and all that jazz. So we have smart health cards, that little thing. So we have smart health cards, which were like a QR code that if you scanned it actually contained all the information pertaining to that person's COVID shots, when they got them, what kind of shot it was. Remember those weird questions? All this stuff. And that information we could send to the institution, to the right people. There's notifications. If somebody didn't get their second shot in the right amount of time, there was notification. Like we built a whole suite behind this because also our developers were doing nothing. We were in the zone where we were like, holy cow, like there's no purpose for us to be building more physical safety stuff. So instead we focused on this, and it was a really, really good bet. We actually built it with one of our customers here in Canada. And the really striking piece of luck in this, and by the way, all entrepreneurs are lucky. Anybody who's like, oh, I didn't get lucky, it was all me, they're full of shit. Like everybody gets lucky. And at multiple points you get lucky. So for our really lucky point, our exceptionally lucky moment, was the governments in two major jurisdictions here, so Ontario and Alberta, which are two of Canada's most populous provinces, said to all higher education institutions, you must know the vaccination status of your faculty, students, and staff before the start of school. And they told all the schools a month before this was going to go down. And in the world of higher education, a month is not very much time. It is an incredibly small amount of time. So there's a mass freak out. I remember saying to Chris, like during the summer, it was like, oh, we're never going to sell this. They don't want to collect this data. Then, oh, maybe they were interested. And then it was like, holy shit, everyone's interested. It was like, a stampede.
And you were ready. You were ready because you'd already built it.
We had built the tool. We had actually sort of juiced a bit of our infrastructure. That was the other thing that our developers were working on. So we were ready for more capacity. The year before we were doing these self-assessments, we'd have 1 million assessments a week, a minimum. Like it was a ton of people who were doing these things. So we had to really get better infrastructurally. So we did that. And then, yeah, of course, remember the other important things. We were approved by the IT departments at all these schools. They had done the cybersecurity testing. We had done our own testing. They had all the documentation. They trusted us. We were a legit vendor. And for a cool $30,000, they could just turn this thing right on. And we would work with them to configure it. And I almost had a mutiny among my operations staff who were implementing all this software. And I can talk about that if you want. That was the whole other thing. It worked out, but it was just like kind of crazy for a little while. But we basically got all these things implemented. And going back to why this is relevant to the acquisition is that we had the best quarter in our company's history. So we did about 1.5 million in that quarter, basically in the last month of that quarter. And guess what? The next week after that quarter closed, I emailed TCV, this is a company that owned Rave Mobile Safety, and said, hey, great news. We absolutely crushed those numbers that we had been talking about a year before now. Are you still interested in the acquisition? The other part of this is Rave Mobile Safety missed all of its sales targets for 2 years. Okay, so if you're a private equity group, you're going, crap. And by the way, they owned Rave for about 4 years. So it's all coming together for AppArmor and Dave and Chris here. So they're looking to spin off this thing because private equity is looking to get that return on investment, usually in a 5-year window. And by the way, I bold-faced asked him that. I was like, I'm betting you're about to sell this thing off, right? He's like, yes. And I was like, okay, so if we were to sell to Rave, like when would that have to happen so that we could participate in the second one? And he's like, you have a month.
I want to come back. I want to come back to that. Let's definitely talk about that.
Yeah, we will. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
There's so many good things you're saying. I feel like we should double click on a couple of them. One is that like you knew when you had high growth that was a good time to sell, and I think that's something worth talking about because a lot of people miss this. If you're not familiar with M&A, which a lot of founders obviously aren't because they're building our businesses, like if you can sell when you're growing, you will get a much better sale multiple. So it sounds like that did play out for you.
Yeah, we were the I think like 196th fastest growing company in Canada. We were the 30th fastest software company. We did 400% year-over-year growth on average over the last 5 years before that. So that's the other piece of this too. Is like you'd be giving those numbers to a Rave Mobile Safety that was stagnating, that wasn't hitting its numbers, and then you complement that with even on a percentage basis, like our data makes Rave look like a much better package in the wholesale. But basically, we were on the upswing, and I think we also knew too, and we were very transparent with this. Like we knew that this COVID revenue wasn't going to last forever, right? So like we locked in as much as we could. But we knew that probably those modules had a 2 to 3 year lifespan. It's kind of our estimation, which I think was pretty accurate. And we told that to TCV, and we said, I think that's why we didn't get a 7 or 8 times multiple. Is they looked at it and they went, well, these are good numbers, and it works in the timeline that we want to package this out with Rave to Motorola or to whoever was going to be the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
But they were also probably like a little bit skeptical that that revenue was going to last like the entire time. Now we did actually pick up a lot of new customers who did end up staying with us and did other stuff on our platform.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a percentage of that I'm sure it's like I don't have the visibility anymore, but I'm sure some percentage of that turned.
Yeah, and then it sounds like some of this worked in your favor because you had really got to know your competitors. You knew what people were thinking about in the industry, and even when you had the opportunity to sell to them, you had an idea that they may then sell it again. So can you talk through that and like how it worked?
Yeah. So I'll just like the first thing is I know I threw Chris under the bus earlier, so I got to bring him out from under the bus. So he he actually was the one who came up with we should be like he did the research on the documentation around like contact tracing and self-assessments and vaccine verification, and he sort of plotted that product roadmap. And for my part, I was like, this makes sense. I believe you. Let's execute your vision on that. So like to his credit, he really came to that. For me, when it came to understanding the market, like, yeah, I mean, you had to really in those days because it was almost like the market restarted because like all of a sudden our competitors, which by the way, there were some bigger than Rave as well. There's a publicly traded company that I don't want to get into right now, but everybody was releasing new tech, right? At the same time, because we were all like, oh shit, our markets are evaporating or totally changing or whatever, like you need to pivot in this moment. And you had to really be on top of it. And just being a good salesperson at the very least, just to sort of understand how am I going to position my stuff to be better than the other things in the market. A lot of the time they refer to this like, what's your kill slide? And your kill slide is like your slide where maybe you don't name your competitor, but you're positioning against them, sort of covertly, I guess. And, I would make sure that like we were updating our stuff almost on a weekly basis to be aware of what they were talking about so that we could position ahead of it or somehow address it as we were going through our demos. That's just good business.
Yeah, so you were doing the research really to help you sell, and then it also benefited you.
I'm a sales guy. Like
help you sell the product. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were a very product-led sale. Like you put the product, like in the demo, we just show the app, we go through everything, and branded to that organization that we were demoing. It was like a killer demo, but it wouldn't have been very effective if we were talking about all the things we had been talking about, perhaps even 3 or 4 months before the pandemic sort of hit in March of 2020. So it really involved a wholesale, like a really, really big change in our business.
So when you went back to them and said, hey, our numbers look better, what can you do now? Can you say how much? Oh, they gave you phantom stock, didn't they?
Yeah. So the kind of like some weird complexities for Canadians is like if you own shares in a Canadian and an American corporation, there's actually like the accountants. I'm an accounting enthusiast. I'm not an accountant, and they're basically like, there's a scenario here where you could get double taxed, and I was like, wow, cool. So I was like very much on what is the path of least resistance. We'd already made a lot of money. I think what we were looking at was what's enough to keep us around. And so, yeah, they gave us this kind of like phantom equity, which was like, in the event of a sale, we will pay you this much money. The only problem with that is that, again, going back to taxation, is the amount it was paid out. It's basically classified as a bonus, which kind of sucks because that's like one of the higher tax brackets. Whereas when we sold the company, and this might be relevant too, we did a share sale. So we were selling our shares. So it's a capital gain. So obviously a much lower tax threshold than getting a big bonus. So basically like half of it went right to the government as soon as we got carried through on the Motorola deal. But the Motorola deal, by the way, was a lot more fun because Chris and I didn't have to do the due diligence really. Like we just showed up for a couple of meetings, smiled. I did some schmoozing. I met the CTO of Motorola. I met their chief legal counsel. We went to a steakhouse. I'm vegetarian. It was hilarious. Good stuff. But like nothing like the first sale where Chris and I were trying to do all the due diligence by ourselves without any of our employees knowing. And that was pretty crazy. So.
And I mean, when you sell your business, you're responsible for making sure that the business itself continues like operating in a really good way. And of course, you weren't totally responsible for that either the second time.
Well, I mean, that's why we hid it from our employees. Like, if I thought it was something that was going to like really negatively affect them, I think you have a moral obligation and probably a business obligation to tell your staff like somebody's going to be let go or you're doing layoffs. You got to give people a heads up. But for us, it was like, well, we knew exactly what was going to happen on the transaction in terms of our staff, and we knew that they weren't planning on letting anyone go. And in fact, they actually all of my staff got a bonus through the acquisition. It wasn't life changing, but everybody got a piece on the way through, and
So
everybody got a raise as well, actually too.
So when you were given the phantom equity to hopefully help this Rave resell, was it so it's tied to an earnout? You had to stay for a certain period of time?
Like it was kind of, it wasn't explicitly stated as an earnout, but it was effectively an earnout. It's like, oh, these shares will like vest at a certain effectively. I'm just using like loose language here, but like the value of these will be sort of like later. And there was no value in those until the deal happened anyway. So it was kind of like we needed to be there, part of the company and actively working for us to participate in the secondary transaction. And we did, and it was like, I'm not complaining. It was like a good amount of money, but it's not in the order of magnitude of what we got for our first acquisition.
That's really interesting because so a lot of people refer to this as like getting a second bite at the apple, and some founders, they want to sell to a company that may resell for that second
rollover.
But yes, but sometimes it's because the founder can't get as much as they want to in that first sale, and this is a way to like get a little more in the second sale. And it wasn't that case for you.
No, like I don't know what's enough, right?
Yeah.
Like to me, that's more than enough, and I thought it was fair. I thought it was worth when I considered also like not to use a businessy buzzword, but like the synergies that we had with our strategic acquirer and all that kind of stuff. It made a lot of sense, and I think I more felt like, so actually I didn't really mention this, but on the second offer, the $40 million offer, the earnout was officially 3 months. So it was a very, very short earnout. Now, again, they tied us with this phantom equity for the future sale of the company again. But like we could have walked away from that and it wouldn't have been a huge deal. But I just kind of felt like I wanted to stick around too, because I think there was like an obligation to my staff, my customers and the technology. And I wanted to make sure everything was in a good place before we left, like as good as possible. But yeah, I remember even too during the acquisition, they asked us, "Do you want to roll over anything?" And we were kind of like, "No." Maybe we should have a little bit. I think it would have been really complicated from a tax perspective. I actually don't know if we could do it that well, just because of my Canadianness. But yeah, so I think for us though, it was just like, no, like I want to lock in this win. I want to. You don't get that many opportunities to lock in the W. I was like, I want this win. So
yeah. So how did you feel after you locked it in? After it went through, and how did it feel?
So there's two big moments I'll give you. The first moment was when they told us they were doubling the offer from 20 to 40. So I was actually right again in the book. I'm just gonna keep. I don't know if you can see.
Well, yes, please promote the book, because I haven't said that. You have a great book, and I think actually Andrew dropped the link in the comments so people can grab it there.
Start different. You get it on Amazon, Audible, Kindle. If you want to hear my voice for 6 hours, you can download the audiobook. Who would want that? Anyway, so I was at so I was basically at a gas station with my daughter. She had been born. She's in the back seat in the little, baby seat. And I was looking at her and I was making silly faces at her in the window. And I was pumping gas and I get an email. So naturally I pull my phone out and I look, and it was TCB responding saying, "That's great news, guys. Yeah, we'd like to double the offer to $40 million. We'll have an LOI pending in the next couple of days." And I was like, holy shit. And I kind of like was just pumping the gas, kept doing that. And then about 10 seconds later, Chris calls me. Chris was like really locked into email back then. And so he's like, "Holy shit, did you see that?" I was like, yeah. So that was kind of when I knew it was like going to happen. And then when we actually got the money, again, oddly enough with my daughter, this time we were at the pediatrician. She was getting, normal checkup. And we're there, and I used TD Bank, and I got a buzz in my pocket. It's like, "You have an incoming deposit of $20 million. So I was like, holy shit. So that was pretty cool. So I'd say like that's what it was for. I'm really glad that I felt very satisfied, accomplishing an objective. It was, and I can go into this in a bit more detail if you want. I don't want to be a bummer for anybody here today, but it was also kind of like interesting because there's a term you guys have in the US for like a president without congressional support. It's like a lame duck. And I kind of started to feel like a lame duck, sort of like founder, where I was sort of in this new ecosystem, but I was kind of in the way. I didn't really have the same. I was more of like a figurehead for my staff, but I was also trying to bring everybody together, and but I didn't really have that much authority. Like it really just changed, obviously, pretty drastically. And so while I was really, really satisfied on a personal level and obviously a financial level, and I'm still incredibly blessed and thankful that I had that opportunity and had this happen. It was also sort of a moment where I was starting to be like, okay, like what am I doing and who am I? And I was starting to lose sort of like grasp of my identity. And that really played out after we're done, which I can talk about too. So I guess that's like what I want to say is it is great, but it's a mixed blessing. And also, by the way, nobody gives you any sympathy for this after you're sold. They're like, "Oh, boo-hoo, too bad for you, pal." And that's fine. But I think a lot of people equate like the money with the happiness. That money is as convenience, money is comfort, money is autonomy, but it is not necessarily purpose. And I think that was a pretty big change.
Can you tell us how you found purpose after that?
Yeah, so like I struggled for a while. So like so a lot of people ask me too. I was on John Warrillow's Built to Sell podcast. Like, so what'd you do with the money? What'd you buy? And I didn't really have a great answer. I went on vacation for 6 weeks with my wife and my daughter, who was 1.5, which some people were like, that sounds pretty bad, but okay. So we went to Europe and it was amazing. We went through all these different places. We actually ended up in Istanbul at one point. And in Istanbul, I had this like total freak out. I was just like we had a bunch of other things happen. Like our hotel room was really small. The Euro, like the Champions League final happened to be there while we were there. So there were so many people, like it was crazy. And it was just aggressive. And so so that along with like me not really sure, like, what am I doing here? What's my purpose in life? Why am I doing this? I just had this freak out, and my wife was like, "We can go home if you want," and whatever. And I kind of like locked it back in, and we kind of finished the trip, and we had a great time and everything. But then when I got home, I was like, I need to find a way to get back to a sense of purpose. And so one of the ways is what I'm doing here today. So I enjoy talking to entrepreneurs. I enjoy paying it forward, just giving people insight into my experience. The advice I can hopefully offer you is helpful. That's why we started our podcast, also called Startup Different, which we just won the Signal Award. So that's pretty exciting. And obviously writing the book was sort of cementing the legacy and also putting as many lessons as I possibly could. And by the way, a lot of them aren't like, look how smart I am. A lot of them are like, this is when I really screwed this up, And I think that's where a lot of people get a lot of benefit. And so that's a lot of this right now. And the last thing is, and I was kind of like telling you this while we were off mic, is I'm looking at starting another business, and it's not because I like to work, super hard or whatever. It's that I find a lot of purpose in building and making things. And so my next thing is not even SaaS. It's totally different. I'm learning a bunch of new stuff, and it's really fun. And I'm really enjoying that. But I need that, I found. As opposed to, just perhaps like being a dad or just sitting on my ass playing video games. And I don't, but playing video games endlessly, I needed something to get behind.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, that resonates for a lot of us. It's like, we enjoy this, we enjoy the ride. And that's one of the reasons why we do it.
And people can't understand that though, just to be clear. Like one of the, like, it's funny, like you talk to somebody who's not an entrepreneur and they don't get it. They're like, why? Why would you do that? Why don't you go learn a language? Why don't you go? And like maybe I'll do that at some point. But like for me, like I get the most satisfaction. This is like what I wanted. This is what I enjoy. This is my muse. This is what I'm good at. But for other people, for the normies out there, they just don't, they don't really get it. Yeah. So it's a big change.
Yeah. I have one more question here I want to ask you, but before I do, if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to drop them into the little question box at the top right of your screen. And then I'll go through those and we can see what everyone wants to ask you about. But yeah, one thing I was curious about is, so you kind of mentioned that you had you approached other potential buyers. And obviously this is something that can really drastically increase how much you sell for. So how did you go about that? It sounds like you didn't have a banker representing you, but you might have reached out on your own to some potential buyers.
Yeah, back to being a sales guy. right? So how do you drum up new business? It's just that cold outreach and saying, look, this is what we're thinking of. This is what we're talking about. Now, mind you, by this point, or after year 8, I'd been to a bunch of trade shows. I'd met some of these competitor representatives in person. Some of them, I should mention, also reached out to us. So, like for example, Rave obviously did. A really big, again, I've alluded to it a couple of times, but another large publicly traded company in our space approached us, and I recognized them. I was like, oh, I'll talk to this guy for sure. But then otherwise, yeah, it was just kind of like outreach. To be honest, I have mixed feelings about this. So since maybe this will be interesting for the audience, but since I sold, I joined a lot of different founder groups. I actually sucked at networking before this, and I joined a bunch of different founder groups, and one here in Toronto that's really good, and some really interesting people there. And they were kind of like, you should have run a process because you might have gotten more money or whatever. And I think that was kind of, I don't think I regret it, but I think it would have been interesting if I had actually gone through that and run a formal process. Actually, I'll point out another reason why we didn't run a process is we actually did have a pitch to us from a major accounting firm who also does M&A work up here. And in their deck to pitch us to work with them to sell the business, they had the first slide that was our name, and then the second slide was what they thought we did, which was wrong. So we were like, well, fuck this. I'm going to go figure this out myself. And so I just did. It's a high agency moment. I just like went for it. And yeah.
Well, who did you lean on? How did you figure it out? Who did you lean on for help?
In terms of what? Sorry, which part?
Just like figuring out what you were doing when, in the deal.
Yeah, like a lot. So I mean, so they're setting up the deal, so finding out people to buy us. That was just like outreach and just having conversations and kind of like cagely working through that process, talking about what we're doing, what they're doing, what their plans were, what they were thinking, and kind of getting a little bit out of each other. Then after that, though, yeah, of course, I had like once we had found Rave, like we had an army of accountants, we had an army of lawyers, like we did that really well, and you need to do that. That'd be silly to do it otherwise. Yeah, so they were the people who sort of helped like walk us through. Okay, like this is the experience, but it was just a little bit different, I guess. We just didn't have the banker piece. We had the other two, the lawyers and the accountants, but we just didn't have the banker. So.
Yeah, cool. No, I like that call out of like. It's especially a good question if you have a strategic buyer that's is paying you a good amount for the business. It's like, do you then also run a process where you get other people involved, or do you not? And I think there's a case for going both directions.
It can go either way. Like I wish I could provide a lot of clarity for people here. Like we had a great outcome. I guess the real question is, it kind of goes back to like, what is enough? So let's say we got a really good offer, and then I decided to run a process that could piss off potentially the acquirer. The process doesn't go well, we don't get anything. So like I don't know. I think for Chris and I, we were just like, no, this is enough. Like this is worth it. So let's just focus on this and not blow it. So we did.
Yeah, I like that question. What is enough? I think that's a whole nother topic that's like really helpful to go into. All right, we have a few questions here. Sue is asking. She says she's in Toronto. What's the founders group that you mentioned?
Nice. Hey, what up? Hey, go Blue Jays, eh? Let's go. Yeah. So there's a couple. So first off, actually, Lexi, you're also part of Hampton. So Hampton is a network started by Sam Parr. You have to have a base level of like revenue. I don't know what it is, but anyway, you can apply online. There's a Toronto chapter. It's pretty good. There's another group that is like, it sounds really bougie. It's not a secret society because it's not that interesting. But there's this group called ICE, which is like, it's something entrepreneurs. And it's just a bunch of people that have exited for, in some cases, like quite a bit of money. I feel really out of place in that room. I'm probably the smallest acquisition in that room, but fun to talk to those people. And there's also, lastly, there's post-exit founders, which is, again, in my case, appropriate. But PEF is a free one to join, and they have a chapter in Toronto that's starting up recently. So I've just been a part of that. But there's like getting into the startup ecosystem, you will inevitably like through incubators, through Y Combinators, through PeerScale. There's a lot of stuff in the Greater Toronto area that works really well that you should investigate. And worst case, just ask AI, hey, I'm interested in this, let me know, and it'll probably give you a pretty good list. But that's my list anyway. So
Thank you. And Catherine's asking, she says, I would love to hear more about building relationships with competitors.
Mhm.
Recently, I've had a few reach out since I'm getting traction. And yeah, how did you handle that? We
Yeah,
talked a
that's
little bit
kind of
about that,
tricky.
but yeah.
Yeah, it's a real, really tricky dance because on the one hand, so like we're just going to assume nobody's colluding. Okay, we're not going to break the law. So let's just start with that. Secondly, is like I want to make sure that when I'm talking to them, I'm not giving away something that isn't meaningful or already publicly available. So don't start the conversation off by being like, well, we do this much in revenue per year. Like that's a bad idea. Don't even, you're a private company for a reason. So hold your cards close to your chest. What you want to talk about is the direction of your company in sort of abstract terms. So we're looking to grow. We've been growing well. We're looking. It's all qualitative, not quantitative. And then maybe you talk about like the way the technology works, but this is something that they could really find on your website. But because you're explaining it to them, you can sort of focus on different points, and add more emphasis or whatever you want to do. But basically, being very cagey around this experience, and then just keep the lines of communication open. I kind of think about how in like the White House, there's like the bat phone to call like Moscow. You kind of have the idea where you have like the bat phone in case, I don't know why you necessarily have to call competitors. Like we had that fraudulent thing, like things happen. We actually had another scenario, which was there was a patent troll. If you ever heard about this concept, somebody goes out there, they get a patent, and then they go around and they try to hit you up and say, you owe us 1% of like your global revenue going into perpetuity. It's just bullshit. Here's another thing about patents is that if you take a patent and you take them to court and you beat them and they have the patent, they lose the patent. Patent's gone forever. So like it's actually really high risk for them to do this too. So they're just trying to hit you up. Anyway, so I actually told our strategics about that as well, that we were getting hit up on this patent troll or whatever. But so basically you just keep these lines of communication open. I'd have a call with one guy. I would do it like every quarter and it would just be like an update. And a lot of it was kind of like trying to seize trying to identify like when would they be interested, if at all, would they be interested in buying, how many look at their public posture, how often are they buying companies and for what amounts, if you can know. And that'll kind of put you in a position to see where you're at. The last thing too is that group then also becomes the group that you want to step on their toes as much as possible in the market. You then want to go into it's not disingenuous, this is business. So you're just going to turn around and then you're going to focus on how do we beat company X? They seem like they might buy us in X amount of years. We want to be beating them 60, 70% of the time. How do we do that? And relentlessly focus on that. And then by the time you want to sell in a couple of years, you're going to be not only your multiple is going to be better, is all I'm going to say here. Like you're going to be better valued because they are just going to be like, holy shit, we need these guys to stop. I remember after we joined Rave, there was a couple of different experiences, a couple of different people. It's weird talking to people on the other side after you're acquired by a strategic, but talking to them, and they were like, we were just going to start telling people that we could do whatever you guys did because we were just our asses kicked. And I was like, sweet, that was exactly what I wanted to hear. We did it right. So anyway,
that's really helpful and practical. And one other thing to add there is like I think a lot of founders approach these conversations where like they feel like they have to answer questions, but really I would like turn yourself into the asker. Is like this is your chance to get together information about them. So like just ask a lot of questions instead of answering all of them.
Classic, like again, another classic sales tactic is the person who speaks first loses. Let them talk, let them run. Maybe they can't handle dead air. That's great. So you just sit there and they're going to just tell you stuff like by accident.
Yeah.
One last thing there too. Sorry, just because I love this. I love this kind of strategic stuff. Is when you're having those conversations. So obviously, like less is more is important. But be sure you've got a really clear agenda of what you want to get on a per call basis, and don't just kind of go into it willy nilly. Like have and don't go right at it. Like work your way. This is all soft selling. Work your way into that. Build rapport with them. Make it so you feel like you can trust each other. So then when the time comes and you actually sell, one of my strongest contacts was somebody at TCV by the time we were selling, and I felt like I could trust this guy, and this guy felt like he could trust me. And I got to say, during the finer moments of maybe more tense moments of closing that deal, it was really, really important that I knew that guy well. So
yeah, this is cool. Thank you. This is the kind of like detailed stuff that we all need that like you just are not going to find in a blog post. So thank you.
It's weird. People don't quite talk about acquisitions that much. Not in this That's why I love your stuff. So anyway.
No, thanks. Okay,
Yeah.
2 more questions if we can get to them. One from Cecilia. She says, did you have a number in mind when you started your business for which you would entertain offers to sell?
Like a totally fair question. Chris did. I don't think I did. I really don't. I think a good salesperson sells something for the maximum possible value. You know, you don't really think about it as like, what could I sell it for? It's like, how much are they willing to buy for, if that makes sense. So for me, it was kind of more like I wanted to go through the process to understand, oh, you're welcome, to kind of go through the process and understand, like, push them on what they think it's worth and going through that, as opposed to having a number. Did I think that one day I wanted to sell? Yeah, for sure. And again, I mentioned John Warrell earlier, but he has a really good book as well. Not to plug somebody else's book during this, but gives you an idea of how much I'm paying it for. Is John Warrell's book, Built to Sell, is really good because it's all about building systems and making it so you're very appealing to be acquired. We didn't even talk about systems today, but so that's something you might want to consider as well. Like for me, yeah, I wanted to sell someday. I never imagined my company being like an empire or IPOing or whatever. And maybe I aim too low in that regard. I don't know. Maybe it's the Canadian in me, but I always just felt like the deal we were offered was really, really good based off of our revenues and where the technology is going.
And then one final question from Mariana. She's asking, how did you structure incentives for your employees? Was there an option pool?
Yeah, we didn't do an option pool. I see why you'd want to do it, and why not. The thing is we always bias. Like, again, we didn't go into this being like we're definitely going to sell the business one day. And a lot of our employees, we had very little churn, which is really, really important. Good culture, so important. Oh my God. But anyway, so by the time we got to the end of the process, you know, we had bonused the hell out of our employees. We had given them tons of raises. We had really made their lives comfortable. Like, we invested in them so that they would invest in the business. And we always rationalized, like, look, we're not giving you equity of any kind in the business. Instead, we're going to give you money now. We're going to give you more bonuses now. You'll have a Christmas bonus every year, assuming the company's like growing and doing well, all those things. But like, we're going to give you the money up front. And anybody knows like basic finance is that money now is more valuable than money later. And so it was like, rather than you guys having this like phantom, or not phantom, but like potentially never occurring lottery ticket, we're instead going to give you a more consistent bonus structure based on objectives, based on performance reviews, based on other things, as opposed to the pool. Do I think an employee pool is a bad idea? No, I think it's a good idea if you want to do it too. We just didn't do it. Perhaps it wasn't as in vogue when we were sort of getting things going, and it was just like sort of too late in the process. The other thing is just like, I always felt like even if I did do that, my employees would still want more. So I like employees. I'm very pro people, but they want more, right? And so the more that if I gave them, I always felt like I'd have to give them the bonus and the option pool benefit, which to me, I was like, I kind of would just prefer to give them one or the other. So that's where I landed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just asked Andrew if he could drop a link to Dave's podcast right in the chat there.
Cool.
So hopefully you can drop it in. Where can people find you if they want to learn more? Because this has been really such a great hour.
So again, book, Audible, Kindle, Amazon, all good stuff. Podcast, anywhere you get a podcast.
Link, you know. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, there we go. Like anywhere you get a podcast, for all it's a billion platforms. And I also have a newsletter called Dave versus AI, where I specifically try to take on AI topics, and that's kind of interesting. That's been actually a lot of fun. I've been really deep into that these days. And yeah, those are probably the best places. And of course, actually, if you want to message me on LinkedIn, I will actually respond. I am a real person. I don't use AI.
That's kind of how we connected, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. We were saying that we never actually spoke in real life till this. So it's just kind of crazy because we've been talking for a long time. But yeah, you reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm actually there. And you can also do our contact us on our website, startupdifferent.com.
Thank you for sharing your insight today. It's been really great. And I always appreciate connecting with you. And it's nice to do it in this forum so everyone else can learn from you. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. It was great.
All right. Bye, Dave. Bye, everybody. Thank you.